Hello, welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with the story of my life. Chapter 13, The Frost King. The winter of 1892 darkened my childhood happiness with a single cloud. I lived in a long period of fear, anxiety, and self-doubt. I lost my love for books, and when I think of those days now, it chills my heart. I had written a short story called The Frost King, and had sent it to Mr. Anaganos of the Perkins Institute for the Blind. This story was the root of all the trouble, and I had written it when I was at the home often after I learned to speak. At Fern Quarry, Miss Sullivan had described me the beauties of the late foliage. And this description triggered the memory of a story which I had read aloud to me sometime. I must have retained the story in my subconsciousness, and I was unaware of this when I was making up my story. So I wrote the sentence after sentence on the braille slate, and after the story was finished, I read it aloud to my teacher. I remember being briefly annoyed when she corrected the pronunciation of a word. I also recall reading it aloud at dinner to my assembled family. They were surprised I wrote so well, and someone even asked me if I read the story somewhere. This question surprised me, as I do not have any memory of the story being read to me. "No, this is my story," I insisted. "I have it written for Mr. Aganos." It was suggested that I change the title of the story from Autumn Leaves to The Frost King. I did so and sent the story to Mr. Aganos on his birthday, who was delighted with my work. He also published it in one of the Perkins Institution reports, taking my happiness to a supreme level. But I was soon dashed to earth when a startling discovery was made. A story called The Frost Fairies by Miss Margaret T. Canby had been published in a book called Birdie and His Friends much before I was born. These two stories were strikingly similar in content and language, though it was clear the Frost Fairies had been read aloud to me sometime, and I had plagiarized it, albeit unknowingly. I was stunned. What a disgrace I was, I thought. The people who love me now regarded me suspiciously, but how could I have done something like this? I struggled to remember anything that I read about previous and could only recall Jack Frost and a poem for children called The Freaks of the Frost. Although Mr. Aganos was greatly worried initially, he believed what I had to say and was so kind to me that my clouds of gloom almost disappeared. I tried to be happy to please him and made myself as pretty as possible to celebrate Washington's birthday, which is soon after I received the sad news. The night before the celebration, one of the teachers of the institution questioned me regarding the Frost King. In my reply, she detected a confession that I recalled Miss Campy's story called The Frost Fairies. She laid her findings before Mr. Aganos immediately, although I categorically told her she was mistaken. Mr. Aganos, who was rather fond of me, refused to believe me, and I was convinced that Miss Sullivan and I had plagiarized someone else's thoughts in order to impress him. I was present for a court of investigations made up of teachers and officials of the institution, and Miss Sullivan was asked to leave the room. Then I was grilled with persistent questions, the sole objective of which was forced to admit that I recall having the Frost Fairies read aloud to me. I sensed that all of them were suspicious, and even loving friends looked at me with reproach. My heart beat like a drum. I could only speak in monosyllables. I suffered deep inside, even though it was only a mistake on my part that I did not even realize. When I left the room finally, I was too dazed to even realize my teacher's caresses or the kind words of my friends who said I was a brave girl and they were proud of me. I wept in bed that night, and the thought of the death before morning arrived comforted me greatly. I think my spirit would have been shattered beyond repair had this incident taken place when I was much older. But because I was so young, the angel of forgetfulness managed to make the bitter memories and sadness appear to me. Miss Sullivan had never heard of the Frost Fairies or the book in which it was published. With the aid of Dr. Alexander Graham Bell, she began investigating the matter and soon reproached her deductions. It appeared that Mrs. Sophia C. Hawkins possessed a copy of Miss Canby's book, Birdie and His Friends, in 1888, the same year we spent the summer with her at Brewster. Miss Hopkins told me later that she had tried to read several books while Miss Sullivan was away, and she was sure that Bertie and his friends was one of them. Sadly, the book had disappeared when she sold her house and disposed of several juvenile books. Bertie and his friends was one of those books she had given away. I was a small child then and barely remember reading these stories, but it was sure that the language was effectively embossed in my brain when the stories were read to me, although no one knew this date, including myself. People were kind to me during these difficult times, and I received many sympathetic messages. Miss Canby herself wrote me a kind note saying, "You will write a great story out of your own head someday, and that you will be a great help and comfort to many." Somehow, this prophecy has never come true. I have never endeavored to play words again except for the pleasure of it. But also, I would have gripped by the fear that what I wrote is not my original work. Even attempting to write a letter to my mother would seize me in terror, and I would check this sentence repeatedly to ensure they hadn't taken from a book. If not for the consistent encouragement of Miss Sullivan, I think I would have given up writing altogether. When I read the Frost stories much later, I realized I'd borrowed heavily from it. Phrases describing golden autumn leaves as they are beautiful enough to comfort us for the flight of summer were taken directly from Miss Canby's story. I realized I had this habit of gathering what pleased me and penning it down as my own. This habit forms a major part of my initial attempts at correspondence and writing. I realized I'd also borrowed heavily from different sources when I wrote about the old cities of Italy and Greece. Like every other young, inexperienced person, I was also learning through a simulation and imitation as I tried to put my thoughts into ideas and then in words. Everything I discovered in books that pleased me were written down in my memory bank, either consciously or subconsciously, till I adapted it. As Stevenson rightly put it, the young writer instinctively tries to copy whatever seems admirable, and then shifts his admiration with incredible versatility. Only after years of practice do men and women master the legion of words. I haven't completed this process yet. I am positive I cannot distinguish my own thoughts from the ones that I read. Whatever I read and formed the very thought of my mind. My compositions are made up from my own crude notions and are polished with the brighter thoughts of authors I have admired. Possibly the greatest difficulty of writing is to express our confused ideas, partial thoughts, and feelings with the language of an educated mind. It's like trying to put a Chinese puzzle together where the words are not fitting in the spaces or not matching the design. But we keep trying as we are not ready to concede defeat where others have succeeded. There is no way to become original except to be born so, says Stevenson. I know that I might not be original, but I do hope to make my amateurish artificial compositions much better in terms of originality. This way, my own thoughts and experiences will emerge from depths in a way. This bitter experience did me good as it made me realize the problems in my comparison. Sadly, it also resulted in the loss of a dear friend, Mr. Aganos. After the story of my life was published, Mr. Aganos had made a statement in a letter to Mr. Macy. He believed I was innocent, but whatever the case may have been, there was no denying the fact that a loving atmosphere had suddenly changed in that room to a hostile and threatening one, and that the events followed proved this. Mr. Aganos believed that Miss Sullivan and I were innocent for as long as 2 years, and then suddenly changed his opinion about us for unknown reasons. The account of the Frost King has been given to me only because it was instrumental in shaping my life and education. To avoid any misunderstanding, I have stated the facts exactly as they appear to me, without the notion of blaming anyone or defending myself. And that's the end of that chapter. See you later.